Welcome to My Life. I'm John Ochins, and I'm pleased to be sitting here with longtime Oxford resident Jim Parkhurst.
Good morning.
Good to have you on the show, Jim.
Thank you for
and
having me here today.
I like your outfit, by the way.
I'd like to say one thing before we get started, and this is impromptu.
Well, be careful.
Well, I know. I'd like to thank OCTV for supporting all the veterans from this area, and congratulate you guys on your 6th award from the state of Michigan from the American Legion. And thank you again.
Well, it's an honor, and thanks for saying that.
And the staff does a great job, and I know Bill and you guys work together at this, and we sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. I'll pay you later.
Thank you.
I'll gladly pay you Tuesday.
Thank you.
I've got a long list of accolades here for Mr. Parkhurst, and if you live in Oxford, you know Jim anyway, but Jim was born in Lake Orion. He moved to Oxford in 1948. He went into the Army during the Vietnam War, serving in South Korea. He then went to work for Control Data in Rochester. He eventually ended up working for Orion Township and retired from there in 2008. Right now, Jim is probably more known for his activities with veterans than anything else, and there are a lot of those. He's in the American Legion. He's been a past commander. He is currently on the executive committee. He's curator of that wonderful museum that the American Legion has over there in their post. You've got to see that if you've never been there. And in addition to that, he's been on the committee for Flags on Main Street, the Veterans statue in the park, and the helicopter at the Legion Post, the Civil War cannon. He's helped with the Veterans Memorial in Lake Orion, which we're all very familiar with. He's a life member of the VFW, the AMVETS, the Sons of the American Legion, and I don't know. Did I leave anything out? When do you mow your lawn?
I work that into my tight schedule. I get it done.
And pick up the grandkids from school.
I do that also.
He even does that. We're honored to have you with us, Jim.
Thank you.
Say, what's going on? I always like to start with the present. Geez, before you know it, the holidays are going to be here, and the veterans are going to have some terrific programs coming up between now and then. You want to mention a couple?
Sure, we'll throw in a couple there. I'm with the Oxford AMVETS. They'll be out on Main Street doing Clover sales for donations. That's coming up, but I think the program may not get aired, but this will be something that we're coming up for the AMVETS. Again, Veterans Day, we have a small luncheon that takes place pardon me, at the post on Veterans Day. And then we have the kids' Christmas parade in Oxford. I believe that's December 5th. It's going to be coming. We have a Christmas party for our own family of veterans kids that show up, and on the next day, on December the 6th, that's Pearl Harbor Day. The American Legion and the VFW co-sponsor that event for Pearl Harbor. So that's things that are upcoming. And of course, we always have Christmas, and sometimes we sponsor a New Year's Eve party at the end of the year. But we're always busy down there.
Well, and you know, those are the very public things that people hear about around town. But in the background, there's a lot of stuff going on because you guys help a lot of people over the holidays. Yes. And that sort of thing. You want to mention something about that?
Yeah, we have a service officer that's available. You can ask questions. You can call the post at 248-628-9081. We have pamphlets that are available if you need information on burial proceedings that take place at Holly at the Federal Burial Ground. We have information available for that. There are VA handbooks that are available through the post. Our local senators and congressmen drop those off, and our reps do that, which are available for any veterans or people that need information. We do a variety of things for the community. Whatever it takes to help, we help local veterans. We've built wheelchair ramps. Al Yates is one of the members, and he has some guys that support him from GM and our veterans. The money that's raised from our Poppy donations from our various groups, those monies are used towards building wheelchair ramps. So there's a variety of things that we do to help a veteran that needed a medication, something new that's not available through the VA. We've supplied medications like that. So there are a lot of things that people aren't aware of that the American Legion and the rest of veterans groups that we have down there support.
And you do some of the more basic things too, like if somebody needs to know who to call with the
Sure.
VA, you can help them out with that kind of information.
Those numbers are available. There's a VA office in Pontiac. The number's listed in your local phone book. It's available, or you can call and we'll get you the number down there. It's a good idea to touch bases, you know, if you're a vet, see what's available. You may not be aware of. A lot of things were changed last year, about a year ago in June. There are more programs available to you. if you were a vet. So it's a good idea to check into those things.
And not only that, but we mentioned that you're the curator of that wonderful museum over there, and a lot of local school kids get a chance to go through there, and we're encouraging a little more of that activity. Yes. That's a regular event every year, isn't it?
Yes, and you know, we do it basically twice a year. In fact, I should say 3 times a year. Around Veterans Day, Jan Flynn's group from the choir, of course, Jan is one of the directors up there with the choir. We've supported her through the American Legion, turned her in, and she ended up with a $500 donation from the American Legion. They used the money to purchase a portable organ, which is used when they go out on site like Lakeville or other programs. That's a school type event that's through the Americana that Jan supports up there in the Legion, and all the veterans groups show up for that day. And in fact, you guys are always there taping that airs on the public TV.
Right.
And that's another thing I want to mention too. While we're at this point, all these things that we do and that you guys cover for the year for veterans that take place, they're put on a DVD. And that's why you guys received so many awards, 6 of them. They are put on a DVD, and we send a copy of that DVD. It goes off to the Department of Michigan. It was one of the first ones that was ever done. That DVD is used and played at state offices and stuff that are using that DVD, and that's the reason you guys continue to do that and continue getting those awards, because of what you do.
Well, thank you for saying that. I want to talk a little bit more about Jim Parkhurst now. You were born actually in Lake Orion, weren't you?
Yes.
But let's go back a little further than that. Do you know who in your ancestry first touched on American soil?
Yes, I had a George Parkhurst that came. He came from the Isle of Wight, I believe, out of England, came over on a boat, and he had a family with 13 children.
Roughly when would that have been?
Late 1600s.
Okay, a long time ago.
Yes.
I mean, almost back to the Pilgrims.
Yes.
Okay, so he settled where?
He settled around Simsbury and Dansbury, Connecticut, in that area.
And how did your family arrive in Michigan?
Well, a couple of his sons, John Parkhurst and another one, served during the Revolutionary War. They had a land grant that came about from West Webster, New York, from the government at that time. And at that time, one of his sons decided to travel along with my great-grandfather, who came to Michigan around 1828, when Jesse Decker from Lake Orion came to this area to settle.
Okay.
So approximately 1828 is when he stepped foot around the Lake Orion area. He went back about 1830 to New York and brought back one of his cousins, John. And John and Nathan Parkhurst came back here to Lake Orion, and the area that is known where the Legion Post is, from Drainer Road, that intersection, on both sides of the road, from there to Drainer Road, they owned both sides of the road at one time.
Okay, we need to take a break right now, but we're going to come back and talk more about your Michigan roots in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Elgin Nichols.
And I'm Dave Kenny. Together we want to invite you to our weekly show, Minutes by Minute.
Minutes by Minute is a show where we talk about what's going on with your local Oxford-Addison commissions and councils and other local political groups, passing out legislation and ordinances that affect you. We believe that there is humor in politics and government, and you just have to look for it.
And usually we find it. For example, did you know that a local village has an ordinance that says if you have an acre of land, you're allowed up to 25 chickens, but no rooster?
That could be bad news for the chickens and bad news for the rooster.
Check out our weekly Minutes by Minutes, Monday through Friday, 11:30 a.m. and 10:30 p.m.
There is a warning, Minutes by Minute could be contagious.
Back here on My Life with Jim Parkhurst from Oxford. Jim, you were starting to tell us about your family's roots in Michigan. Why don't you pick it up? I believe 1828 was the magic
Yes,
year?
about 1828, he went back to West Webster. Well, he came out here with Jesse Decker, and then my great-grandfather Nathan went back to New York, on West Webster, New York. His other cousin John came with him. They came out here back about 1830, 1831.
Were they farmers, or what was their occupation?
Yeah, they were farmers. He had fought in the Revolutionary War and got that land grant, of course, in New York. They were farmers and came here as farmers. They each basically had a trade, I suppose. One was a farmer and the other one did some other work, probably a cobbler or something. But they came here and settled that property from Drainer Road to Indian Lake Road.
Do you have, I mean, this is fascinating. Not many people can go back that far and remember all the names and the years and that. Do you have any memorabilia from them by any chance?
Yes, I've got things at home I've saved.
Do you really?
Yes. It's kind of interesting to know that, be able to save that piece of history and pass that on to my family.
sure.
And I suggest anyone out there that has any inkling at all to do the research now, because it's much easier to look things up and save that information. We tell all the school kids that visit the museum the same thing. But as we go back around 1830 or so, they settled that property. I can remember sitting on the porch. There's a shopping center, of course, on that side over there on the west side of the road. There used to be a big white house, and I remember being there as just a kid sitting on the front porch with my sister, and we'd swing out there on a front porch. And my mother and my grandmother would visit Raymond Parkhurst, who at that time owned that farm. I recently went a year ago to Raymond's funeral. He was 94 years old. My wife and I visited him prior to his death, and he passed away. He lived at Armada, over on Armada Ridge Road, Armada, Michigan, and lucky enough to be able to talk to him. I had lost track, didn't know where he was.
Did you know any of your great-grandparents?
No, I didn't. Just my grandfather died in 1948. I was only a year old at the time. My grandmother, I knew her. Nellie lived here in Oxford and died in 1972. I knew my other grandmother, Pauline Meir, from West Branch. I have a lot of relatives in the West Branch area, and of course up around Traverse City, I'm from that area. But that's about as far as I can go with back as the living ones that I actually knew.
So, your days as a boy, were those days in Lake Orion?
No, we only lived there a year.
A year.
I can remember my dad was a World War II veteran, of course, and after the war, in fact, I'll back it up a notch. Before the war, he worked at American Aggregates for about a year when the World War II broke out.
Really?
Yes. And after the war, of course, he come home and rented the place there in Lake Orion, and that's where I was born, in St. Joe's Hospital in Pontiac, and they lived there from 1947 to 48. And
so where was the next place that you lived?
they moved to 62 Powell Street, Oxford, Michigan.
And what was your dad's occupation then?
My dad, at that time, was an operator, was a crane operator. And he was a crane operator when he hired in at American Ags, and he was a crane operator for Koenig's. After the war, he ended up with a job at Koenig's gravel pit and worked out there for 40 years when he retired.
Did your mom work outside the home?
Yes, my mom used to clean houses and things like that. She was never where she really had a job. She was
an entrepreneur.
Took care of the kids, yes.
How many brothers and sisters
I just
did
have
you
one sister, Linda.
And where did you go to grade school?
Daniel Axford School, right here on Mechanic Street, at the end of Mechanic Street. I'm a hometown kid.
What do you remember about your early days in grade school in Oxford around, what, 1952 or so?
Yeah, I remember going to kindergarten and had the big old round white milk glass bowls hanging from chains. I can still remember that. In fact, I have a 50-year class reunion coming up here on October the 9th and 10th, and we've been discussing a lot of those things, and my class has several of the old pictures that's going to go out in the booklet form that we're working on right now, that'll be all given to all the classmates that show up for our reunion.
Let me give you a little tip on class reunions. The other guys will all look older than you.
I'm not going there. But we know, of course, we have a good time. I always had something to do. I was the hometown kid, or the neighborhood kid, I should say. lived on the east side of town. I delivered about 186 newspapers. And my friend and I, he had part of a route. And we combined them and had about 275 newspapers we delivered every day after school. Did that for several years. And then we took on the task of, some of you may remember the old Grit newspaper. It was a nickel. And we used to do that on Saturday. When we deliver Saturday's paper, we would deliver the Grit as well. So that was another paper. We did that for quite a while. Always made money. I did some auctions with Bud Hickmont when Bud did auctions locally. Used to go to his auction and help him out there, and I'd pick up a gun here or there. And during high school, I worked at Texaco, Art Carvely's Texaco gas station here in Oxford. Pumped gas, waxed cars, changed oil, those kinds of things.
Learned a thing or two.
Yeah, and then I worked at Ed Treese. Once in a while they'd be short-handed, so I'd fill in for somebody, one of my buddies that couldn't work for Eddie on a Saturday or Sunday or after school. I'd fill in down there once in a while.
Did you walk to school, or did you take a bus?
We walked to school. We lived on the northeast corner of town. Walked all the way, when even in grade school, all kinds of weather. Family, of course, back in those days can only afford one car. And that was to get Dad back to work.
Right.
In fact, when my dad in 1947, when he had the place in Orion, rode a bicycle back and forth to American Aggregates. After the war, money was tough, you know. And so in '48, bought the house on some time type program and made payments and bought the house and finally got a car in '48 on. So, yeah, I have a lot of good memories. People in town, I can remember going to, a lot of you here remember Stubb Robinson, Stubbs Barbershop in town. I remember going into Stubbs Barbershop, went in to get a haircut. And I'm in the chair and he's got my haircut about done. He's getting ready to shave and trim around the ears. And fire whistle goes. Stubbs says, "I gotta go, I'll see you." Out the door, I'm dumbfounded. I'm sitting in the chair, I got half a haircut, what am I gonna do? Well, I guess I'll just wait till he gets back. He was off to the fire. He was a town's constable and he was also on the fire department. And so I would walk down the street, which was about 5 doors down, to Gary's pool hall, and I'd go in and play a few games of pool, and I'd keep looking, and pretty soon Stubbs' barber thing out front would start turning, and I knew he was back, so I'd walk back down and get the rest of my haircut. So I have some fond memories of what took place in Oxford.
Yeah. When you were going through high school, Vietnam was going loud and strong. What was going through your mind about that then?
You know, back when in 1965, Vietnam was hot and heavy. A lot of the guys at that time, college was one thing. You could go to college, but it was a draft. It wasn't a lottery system, it was a draft. You go down and register for the draft, and they'd call you, you'll take your physical, and you were usually gone within a matter of a few weeks. You'd go down and they'd take you down, and you were gone to Fort Wayne, and adios. You were on the bus headed down the road.
I'm going to stop you there because we have to take a break, but we're going to pick up on that when we return. Stay with us.
Canine Stray Rescue is Oxford's own local dog rescue. Each year they take in hundreds of dogs and bring them into suitable homes. A certified nonprofit organization, Canine Dog Rescue strives to give pound dogs a new leash on life. To donate, adopt, or even volunteer, call them at 248-628-0435 or go to their website, dogsaver.org, and click on the Canine Stray Rescue League link.
Back here with Jim Parkhurst on My Life. We were just talking about things that were going through your mind about Vietnam and the service and so forth when you were in high school. You want to pick up on that?
Yeah, back then it wasn't a matter of, there was no lottery as we mentioned. It was strictly you had to draft, you had to sign up for the draft. There was a draft going on. Most young men across the country were going off to the Vietnam War at the time. Some had an opportunity to enlist. Well, at that time, things were going hot and heavy, we'll say, in the Vietnam area. You'd go down to enlist, and the enlistment categories were filled, so you were stuck being drafted. And at the time, I would have liked to have gotten into Navy Seabees construction because I knew how to run heavy equipment from my dad, and I worked in the gravel pits. So that was basically it, but that didn't happen. I got drafted. Went into service to Fort Knox, took my basic there, and basic was real short. I had basic about 6 weeks of that. Went straight from there to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for artillery training.
So was that something you decided you wanted to do, artillery, or was that just, did they kind of funnel you in that direction?
They just funneled us in that direction. A lot of the guys were drafted. See, I knew how to run heavy equipment, bulldozers.
I see.
And apparently they took that in consideration. It was a heavy equipment type thing. And I took artillery at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I was finished with that just at Christmas. I got a 5-day leave en route, and I came home, and I had to report back to Fort Lewis, Washington, on I think it was January, it was like January 1st, we'll say.
When did you meet your wife in all this?
I didn't meet her until I became an employee in control data.
Okay, we'll catch up on that later. I just wanted to check in. Okay.
But I ended up, was around December 30th to January 1st, that time period. I ended up at Fort Lewis, Washington, out at Seattle. And was there for a matter of a couple of days, and ended up getting on a plane. I wasn't sure where they were sending me at that point. Got on a plane and ended up in South Korea.
How'd your dad feel about all this?
My dad was a World War II vet, and I talked to you and I talked briefly before this, and in fact I didn't mention a couple of things. My dad had received a Silver Star. My folks had rented the place, of course, by Bunny Run, and during the war my dad had been missing in action 2 or 3 times. There was a naval officer came to the house, and another soldier came to the house, and my mother and my sister were there at the house in Bunny Run. And
so he was no stranger to war.
No, he was there from the beginning till about 3 months after the war. They were afraid. The knock came on the door. They could see they were soldiers, and at that time, it was a bearer of bad news. They were either wounded bad, or they were killed in action. And my mother was afraid to answer the door, so my dad's sister, I should say, Lottie, answered the door. Was living there at the time with her. I answered the door, and here they had presented my mother with a Silver Star. My dad received the Silver Star, and they were relieved at that point. But he received the Silver Star. They had found him. He was wounded, put back in action. They didn't send guys home. If they could patch you up, they'd put you back with your unit and keep going. But he had received a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, and he had 7 Campaign Stars through the Pacific Theater for World War II.
Right, so you went to artillery training. Did you go immediately to South Korea after that?
Basically, I spent 2 or 3 days at Fort Lewis. On January 3rd, I got off a plane at Kimpo Airport. It was snowing and blowing. It was about 12 below zero. I had a set of low-cut shoes on, much like what I have on today. A khaki uniform and a field jacket. Wasn't prepared for cold weather at all. I thought I was going to go to Vietnam. I had called home and said, yeah, I'm on my way to Vietnam. They pulled my orders, and 15 of us ended up on a different plane and went to Fort Lewis. And 3 days later, I'm in South Korea. I'm thinking, wow, this is quite the place. We rode in the back of a truck.
Were you disappointed?
Well, yes and no. I was all prepared. I had mindset I was going to Vietnam with the rest of the guys. And in fact, one of the guys, I took basic in artillery school. Many of you here from Oxford probably knew and had your hair cut by him, Jack McGee. Jack at that time was considered the old man of the outfit and used to cut hair in the barracks for us. And Jack he was pulled. He ended up going to Germany and served in Germany.
So he managed to elude the actual physical location of Vietnam during the war.
I did too, basically. I ended up in Korea. He ended up in Germany.
Tell me, what was your first impression of Korea?
Well, my first impression, I got off, It was winter, it was cold and blowing, and I'd heard stories. And of course, back then they taught a little bit about the Korean War and World War II in school, and I was aware of part of that. But the reality of it, the bitter cold, the wind would blow 30, 40 miles an hour. There was a foot and a half of snow, and I could, you know, during this time period, as I got in the back of the truck and they drove us way up the road 40 miles, looking out the back of a truck freezing to death, covered with blankets, I could see the villages, and countryside was still burnt black from the Korean War. As I was on different patrols and we traveled the area, there were tanks still on hillsides. There was white crosses in one area where several guys were buried. The Greeks and Turks, along with other UN forces, fought over there, and I was there 12 years after the Korean War. There wasn't any of the big high-rise buildings that you see today. If you go on the internet and look, that's a modern city. They've had the Olympics there, of course, already. There was a lot of changes, and when I was there, it was basically kids that were there. We gave them rations. If we had extra rations, we had a lot of C rations, we would give them rations, something to eat. If we had extra blankets, we'd give the people extra blankets that was there. They'd actually repurpose those blankets and make clothes for the little kids.
During that period of time, even though Vietnam was going on, was there really much in the way of any kind of military activity that you were involved in over there?
There was constant activity. They had commandos from the north would always sneak across. They dug several tunnels that came across. They would infiltrate. Their commandos would come across in rafts at the night. There were several occasions where they tried to come across, 30 of them come across at a group, try to kill the South Korean president. They were always a constant agitation, was continually. The DMZ itself was just a bunch of barbed wire that was strung across. Today's modern pictures, as you look at it, they've got cement bunkers, the United States along there. In fact, the U.S. is not involved along the DMZ other than Panmunjom itself and that one building. The South Korean armies taken all the positions along the DMZ.
How long were you in Korea?
I was there. I went in on January 3rd. I went through the MGM Scout Ranger School for about 4 weeks, which was supposed to have been a longer course than that. I took an officer up there and was stuck there for about 4 weeks, so I trained with those guys. Spent that entire 1967 up there. In January of '68, they took the USS Pueblo. At that point, around January, January '68, the 21st of January, I believe. I almost had another 10 days to go. I would have been out of there. I would have had 13-month tour in. Well, I got automatically extended. No, so I spent another 6 months. I didn't leave there till June of '68, the end of June.
Okay, so when you left there in June and you came back here, and that's when is that when you went to work? Tell me, where did you go to work when you got out of the service?
I went to work. It was tough. When I got back, there wasn't many jobs floating around, and I went to work at Industrial Machine Products right around the corner up here in Oxford on Log Street. I worked there for about 1.5 years and was laid off in October of '69, and I went to work at Control Data at that point in Rochester, Michigan.
Okay, very good. We're going to pick up with more on Jim Parkhurst in a second edition of our interview with Jim here on My Life. So please join us next week for that. In the meantime, thanks for joining us, Jim. Don't go away.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.